Run by Dawnaura Weebly, Part 8. Gramps gazed at me momentarily, a look of both wonder and expectation planted firmly on his face. I turned my head away. It was as if whatever emotion was inside of him were spilling into me, compelling me to say something, anything to appease him. I ignored the compulsion and remained silent. "It's all right, you know," Gramps said to me softly, with a slight hint of disappointment. "You don't have to help us. I can find some way to get you back into your proper selected service." "You can?" I instantly shifted my eyes back on his, giving him a brilliant smile. He grinned back, but I could tell it was forced. He wanted to be happy for me, I could tell, but I knew that leaving here meant that their whole plan would be ruined. It meant that they would have little to no chance of ever leaving this disgusting place. This realization soon eliminated the happiness on my own face. "But what will you do if I go?" I asked him. "We'll make do. It's nothing you should concern yourself with, I promise," he had tried to assure me. "But how will you explain my absence?" I continued my barrage of questions. "You leave that to me," he said. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to concentrate on the problematic situation before me. Certainly, whatever the plan, it would be risky for all of them. I wasn't sure if I was willing to accept the guilt if one of them were to get caught, or worse, all of them. However, I would have not had to make this choice if it weren't for them getting me stuck here in the first place. Therefore, could I truly blame myself for such an outcome? Then there was the second issue. This whole God thing. "Gramps?" I asked. "Yes." "Do you really believe that God is real?" I said with the utmost sincerity. "Yes, there's no question in my mind in regard to that. It's more than a belief for me. I know he's real," he replied. "How can you know he's real if you've never seen him?" I asked. No one's really seen him, but I feel him. When I discovered this book, I studied it day and night. Like you, I was skeptical. Yet, something in me changed. I felt more at peace. I felt like someone was watching over me, like I was being protected, like I had purpose. "It's really hard to explain," he replied. I guess I could understand what he meant. His speech immediately reminded me of the moment in the hall. The moment I talked to God and suddenly Gramps appeared, instantly, just in the nick of time. Was it possible that God did that? "Gramps?" I asked again. "Uh-huh." "Do you mind giving me a few days to think about what I want to do?" I asked him. "And don't ask Jay or any of the others to hack me in or out of anything. I could use some time to think." His eyes lit up upon me speaking those words, as if a fire had rekindled inside of him. "Of course," he beamed radiantly. "Take your time, and just give me the word when you're ready. And I'll stand by whatever decision you make." "Thanks, Gramps. You should get some sleep. We got a lot of work tomorrow. I need to go and get the rest of the crew so they aren't dozing off into the boilers," he giggled. "All right," I replied, as I laid my head back down on the flat and stained pillow. "I'll wake you in the morning when it's time to start your shift." "Good night, Z," he said. "Good night, Gramps," I said back as he headed out of the right side pod door to fetch the others for bed. The next day. "Wake up, you buzzards!" I awoke to the sound of Gramps shouting through the aisles between the beds. I shot up like a rocket as well as everyone else. "It's time to sweat like pigs and work like dogs. Let's go, let's go." I leapt from the bed and looked around at the scrambling in the room. I noticed I was the only one still in my jumpsuit. Everyone else was in their undergarments, aside from Gramps, which was not something I was used to seeing. I felt my face get flush, and I looked down at the floor as they ran to and fro to the rusty lockers in the corner of the room. In nothing, of course, but their undies. "Move it, V-Tech. You're too slow, AR. Bells, there's no time to paint your face. Move, move, move." "There's always a little time for beautifying, Gramps," Bells said back as the boys giggled lowly at her response. Gramps simply rolled his eyes and continued. "All right, line up," he said. I looked upward, and everyone was already dressed and standing single file in the center of the room. "You too, Z," Gramps said. The others looked over at me, but I could tell that they still felt shameful for being discovered in their deception, and quickly looked ahead. I raced over to the line and stood behind them, doing my best to mock their stance. "All right, Crew 2, this is Z's first day on the job, so make sure you all keep an eye on her. Don't let her get behind. Understood?" "Yes, Watcher," they all shouted back in unison. "All right, buzzers, let's move out," Gramps said as he turned and began to march us out of the left side pod door. They marched in perfect harmony with their heads held high and shoulders back. I was out of step for only a moment, but quickly caught on. Left, right, left, right. Our chunky boots were like snares upon the metal grated floors. The more we walked, the hotter it seemed to get. Soon, my face was dripping with sweat and my suit was already getting damp. We eventually came to a sudden halt, causing me to nearly knock over V-Tech, who was directly in front of me. He turned around to look at me after regaining his balance. "Sorry," I whispered. "It's okay." He smiled warmly back and quickly turned back around at attention. We had stopped in front of a large door that read, "Boiler Room A through C." Gramps unlocked the door with a digital keycard, and the door slid open. It spewed out an almost unbearable heat, even hotter than the hallway. Gramps instructed Jay, who was in the front of the line, to head inside. We marched in, a single file. The room was filled with 3 rows. Each row had 2 sides. One side had a row of massive boilers, the other side a rail car on rails, which led to God only knows what through a tunnel in the hall. There were 6 massive shovels at the end of the row hanging on the wall near the tunnel. "We're on row C today. Bells, Dickie, and Z, you're on the boilers. V-Tech, AR, J, you're on the rails," Gramps announced to us as he picked up one of the 3 clipboards near the entrance door. They nodded as though they understood, but I was entirely confused about what he meant. Before I could ask what being on the boilers entailed, Bells approached me. "All right, darlin', follow me and just do what I do, all right?" "Okay," I said back. I followed Bells to the boilers. It felt like I was walking into an oven, and I gasped at the overwhelming heat. "You'll get used to it, honey. You wait here while I grab our shovels," she said. While she went off to grab our tools, I watched Jay, V-Tech, and AR throw their 3 shovels into the back of the rail car and start pushing it into the empty and black abyss of a tunnel. "Here you are, sweet pea." Bells handed me my shovel. I looked at it and waited for further instructions. "Dickie's going to take boilers 1 and 2. I'm going to take 4 and 5, and you're going to take boiler 6. "Wait, what about boiler 3? I asked. "Dickie and I are going to split that one, so you only got to do 1. "Well, that doesn't seem fair. Shouldn't we each get 2? "You're new, honey. This stuff ain't easy, and we can't risk having you get behind. You got to be quick as a grasshopper. Getting behind's bad news round here. Trust me. You need to get used to the pace of things before we give you 2 boilers," she said. "Okay. I suppose that makes sense," I responded. Soon, V-Tech, J, and AR were re-emerging from the dark tunnel. They were pushing the cart, which was now filled to the brim with garbage and hunks of coal. They tipped the cart to its side and released the filthy mess onto the floor. Dickie and Bells jogged over to the pile and started scooping up heapfuls and tossing them into the boiler doors. The boiler grew more fierce with each shovelful. I quickly began to follow their lead. I tried to scoop up as much as they did, but it was much too heavy. "Too much work for you, Princess?" Dickie laughed as he came back for another shovelful. I gave him a pitiful look. "Oh, come on. Don't look at me like that. I'm only teasing, Z. Try a little bit at a time and work your way up with each scoop as you're able." He scooped up a massive shovelful of filth and coal and jogged quickly back to the boiler. I took his advice and I released over half of the pile in my shovel. It was still heavy, but at least it wasn't impossible to carry. I half wobbled over to my boiler and tried to fling the mess into the boiler door, but I quickly lost my balance and went hurling toward the angry ember mouth. Thankfully, Gramps grabbed hold of the nape of my jumper and saved me from becoming the boiler's fuel. "Careful, Z. Stand with your legs further apart, like this." He demonstrated by bending his knees and placing a firm footing a little more than a shoulder length apart. "It'll help you maintain your balance from the momentum, okay?" he said. I nodded sheepishly, embarrassed that I couldn't even manage to feed a boiler without nearly killing myself. I tried again, and this time with my feet further apart and planted firmly on the ground. It worked. The boiler grew hotter as it ate away at the rubbish. On and on I went. Jog, scoop, carry, toss, jog, scoop, carry, toss. At one point, I'm pretty sure I scorched some of my lashes from the intense flames. On and on, all day. It was seemingly never-ending, repetitive, back-breaking, sweaty, stinky, filthy, and a heat-intensive hell. "Attention, citizens. It's time for your pre-midday break." Immediately, everyone stopped and threw down their shovels and sighed relief. I looked around a bit more now that I had a moment to rest. I hadn't even noticed the other two crews come in earlier who were in aisle A and B. Out of nowhere, one of the watchers from aisle A, who was looking down angrily at a clipboard, called over one of her crew members. "What's this? You got us behind. This is the third time this week, you useless brat," she shouted at him mercilessly. He looked down at the floor, and by his heaving shoulders, I could tell he was sobbing. His suit was brand new, like mine, so I could assume he was new. Suddenly, the watcher raised her hand and slapped him straight across the face. She hit him so hard it sent him crashing to the floor. I felt my muscles go tense at the sight of it. The poor lad didn't even get up. He just kept sobbing, helplessly. "Get up," the watcher shouted at him, but he wouldn't budge. "I said get up." She shouted again, but this time she went in for a kick to his gut. "Stop!" I shouted from across the room. I knew it was stupid the moment I said it, because the entire boiler room went deadly silent. I couldn't help it. It was as if my voice was not my own in that moment, and it just came pouring out. "Oh, crap," Bells whispered under her breath. "What is she doing?" Dickie gritted between his teeth to Bells and the others. "She's gonna get herself flogged for this." "Who said that?" The watcher from aisle A looked in my direction, her face twisted up in anger. The entire room of people looked at me, which was a dead giveaway. The boy, who was still on the floor and now had a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth, looked over at me in a pitiful sort of thanks as she left him and walked slowly towards me. "And who are you?" she said to me as she now stood within inches of my face. "Z24, I seethed. "Well, Z24, it seems you have problems understanding how things work around here. I suggest we correct that dysfunction of yours and teach you a thing or two about how to respect authority. I say I should issue a request for public flogging. That ought to teach you and all the other newbies to hold their tongues." She spat. "No, there's no need for that," he said nervously. "Oh, really? And why not? You heard her. She can't talk to a watcher like that, she shouted at Gramps. You're right, he said. But us watchers, we have to stick together, right? If you issue that request, it'll go on my record. You know we've been here for a long time. Have I ever issued a request against you or any one of your crew? The watcher considered his words and paced in a small circle, the entire room not daring to move a muscle as they watched the drama unfold. I suppose that's true, I guess. But I won't let this little brat get away with this, not without proper punishment, she pointed at me accusatorily. I'll be sure she receives it, Gramps tried to assure. Oh, will you? She said skeptically. Okay, fine. Do it now, she said. Now? Oh, come on, you can trust me, he went on, trying to smooth things over. No, I can't. And I don't trust anyone, not even you. She thought she could challenge my authority in front of all these people. Now she's going to get what she deserves, in front of all of them. It'll be a good lesson for all these despicable lowlives anyway. You punish her here, and now, or I'll issue the request. It's your choice, fellow watcher. Gramps stood silent for a moment, then turned slowly to face me. He looked like he was going to be sick. He lifted up his hand and paused for a moment. Do it, the watcher said. Do it now or she gets flogged, she said. Gramps took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and brought his hand down, which slapped me hard against my right cheek. Belle's and the boys' eyes began to well, but they dared not say a word. I held my hand to my right cheek, and my own eyes began to water from the sting of it. I looked up at Gramps sympathetically, as I could see his heart was breaking. Again, the watcher told Gramps as she looked challengingly at me with zero empathy. And this time, harder, she growled. You can't be serious, Gramps said. It's her first day. I think it's quite enough. Again, she insisted, not removing her icy cold stare from my suffering. Gramps reared up his hand and let it go more forcefully in the exact same spot. This time, the momentum of it sent me hurling to the filthy ground below, leaving little white dots dancing in my vision. I couldn't stand because of the dizziness that it caused me, so I stayed there until my head would finally stop spinning. Jay nearly leapt forward to assist me, but AR smartly grabbed hold of his arm to stop him from making things worse. Jay reluctantly backed down. That's better, the watcher told Gramps. You have my word that no request will be issued. And as for you, she knelt down and jabbed her baton at my chest. Let this be a lesson about how you treat authority around here. She stood up and proudly turned to her crew. What are you gawking at, you filthy beasts? Hurry up and take your break. When we get back, you better get caught up, or I'll put a request in to flog you all, no matter the consequences of my record, she snapped. They practically flew out of the boiler room with the watcher taking the lead. The other crew and their watcher and ILB followed rapidly, as if being around us troublemakers were contagious. And there we were, alone, when Gramps suddenly broke down in tears.